Welcome and thank you for joining me today. My name is Ray Sahagun, and before I get started here on this first slide, I just want to point out that I do have a social media link for Kakao Talk. So if you want to send me any questions that you have concerning anything that we discuss here today, you're more than welcome to scan the QR code or to just add me directly. I also have my email there. So send me an email message, send me a message on Kakao Talk, because I really do believe that it's important for us to collaborate as professionals, as educators. As long as we're discussing these things and sharing our ideas, there's not any one of us who have a solution to the challenges that we face as educators. So please feel free to contact me. I will try and get back with you as soon as I can. Now on the next slide, you'll see that I am Ray Sahagun. I teach third grade at South Elementary in southern Utah. I've been teaching for about 12 years now. I came to education a little bit later in the game and life, but I'm a little glad for that. I'm 52. I have 4 adult children. 2 of them are married. I've taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. And this year I'm in 3rd grade, and if you asked me, what's your favorite grade that you teach? I think it's similar to asking someone, what's your favorite book? It's usually the one that you're reading. And I'm in 3rd grade right now, and I'm just loving it. I really enjoy it. 3rd grade has wonderful things to offer curriculum-wise. 4th and 5th grade, I think you'll find the same. Wherever you land, wherever you're planted, you'll grow, and it's going to be a great time. I lived in Taiwan, some just interesting odd facts. I lived in Taiwan for a couple of years when I was a little younger, and I do speak a little Mandarin. I read about as fluently as a kindergartner, so nothing really to brag about there. And I do think we have a lot to learn from each other, so let's get started and take a look at the agenda on the next slide. The first thing that we'll discuss is my personal advice and then my philosophy of education. Then we'll get into a discussion on what is effective quality instruction. Then we'll look at what makes a safe and supportive learning environment. And the final thing that I like to talk about is student discipline, and it's my favorite. We'll probably spend most of our time there. So on the next slide, let's take a look at my advice. And what is my advice for you? Well, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be willing to offer you advice. And I think it's a very important thing to remember that while they may have things to offer you, you need to take them in context and honestly kind of with a grain of salt. So I'm almost undermining everything I'm about to say to you, because what I'm about to share with you is my personal experience, and it's things that have and have not worked for me. And honestly, the best way for you to figure that out is to just get out and do. You're going to learn what's going to work best in your classroom. You're going to figure out how you're going to be able to reach all those individual students. So there's going to be things that I say that might speak to you, and I encourage you, take those things and make them your own. There's going to be things that you don't see how that really applies, and just go ahead and discard those things and move on. You're going to find that when you're in your classroom, there's going to be students who just connect with you. There's going to be students who have a personality that maybe doesn't appreciate you and your approach to things. And we're human, and we're all different, and we all have different perspectives. So be willing to understand that everyone's going to see things from a different perspective. On my next slide, I have my philosophy of education. In the center, there is a cartoon. There's a teacher standing in front of the room looking at all of his students. On the right, I have it in Korean. I hope that the translation is decent, but it reads, "I expect you all to be independent, innovative, critical thinkers who will do exactly what I say." That is the contradiction of education. We're trying to help these young people, and in 3rd grade, this is very challenging. We're trying to help them to learn to be independent thinkers. We're trying to help them learn how to make good decisions all on their own. But what have they heard from kindergarten, first into second grade, until they've reached me in third grade? Sit down. Do exactly as I say. No, don't get out of your seat. It's not time to pull that out of your desk. They don't do anything until they are told to do it. That's really, really challenging because we want them to conform to a norm, but we also want them to contribute. They have a lot to contribute. That's what I want to get to today. How do we help them learn to balance when it's appropriate and when it's appropriate to contribute and when it's more important to conform? Continuing on the next slide, my philosophy of education, a couple of rules that I have in my classroom, regardless of what grade I'm teaching. And the first one is we don't treat each other like family. When I share this with my students, some of them look at me very puzzled and they don't understand. Others nod their heads very knowingly, realizing that it's the people we're closest to, unfortunately, that we're often the harshest with, we're the most impatient with, because once we're close and there's that familiarity, unfortunately, we know how to really hurt that person. And we're really willing to do that. I work with my kids to help them understand that that's not what we're going to do in our class. We're going to develop a sense of community. We're going to try and develop a sense of team, indeed, a sense of family, without all of the drawbacks that they may have experienced at home. The other mantra that I share with my kids is tools, not toys. Anything in the classroom can become a toy. That's creative, isn't it? Yeah, it is creative, and we want to encourage creativity. But again, going back to that idea of balancing conformity and contribution, we want them to understand when it's appropriate for that tool to be a toy, a pencil, a piece of paper. And I'll get more into this when we're talking about discipline. But for instance, a piece of paper is an important tool. But it can also be a really fun toy. It can be folded into different shapes and made to fly across the room, have a note that's sent to their classmate. But that's not appropriate in the middle of a lesson. It's not appropriate in the classroom. Take the paper outside and fold it up and see who can fly it the farthest. Tools, not toys. The final thing that we'll spend most of our time on is right time, right place. That goes along with that paper airplane analogy. I think the translation in Korean is more appropriate time and appropriate place. There's really nothing that a kid can do that is evil. They're not inherently bad. They're wonderful, beautiful little human beings who are trying to learn how to fit into society, into this little classroom. And that's a very powerful tool that we'll talk about in just a moment. On the next slide is effective and quality instruction. What is effective instruction? What's quality instruction? Well, I am going to be giving you some very broad generalities here because, again, I think it's important for you to yourself conform to the requirements of the school and the district that you're teaching in and learn how much do they allow you to contribute of your own creativity to make that classroom your own. So in that spirit, what you want to do is make sure that you're teaching each student. For example, in third grade, all students need to learn basic multiplication facts. What is 3 times 9? What is 5 times 7? I'll walk around my class and I'll point at students and say, what's your name? What's your name? And they can respond to me what their name is very quickly. And then I'll begin asking, what is, and I'll give them a math fact. What is 12 times 6? And when they don't answer as quickly with the product as they did when they was asked their name, I move on to the next student and give another multiplication question. What is 8 times 7? what is 9 times 3? Making the point that you need to know these like your name. But that's just the standard, that's the expectation. I need to actually teach each individual student. They may be coming to me with a diminished capacity. They may be coming to me with a much greater capacity. Some learn in different ways, in different styles. Some are very methodical, and they're going to take much more time to massage the material and think it through before they've actually digested it and come to an understanding. So acknowledging that each student is unique is very important. Now you have to find a way to balance that. How do I balance that with the amount of time that I have to teach this concept, with identifying that this student is just a little different, a little slower, a little quicker? How do I help that individual child? That is your challenge. You need to find a way to reach each student. The only way you're going to do that is by learning who they are. They're not just a student who fills that seat in your class. They are the son or daughter in a family. They may be a brother or a sister. Unfortunately, what I'm finding more often is they may have just watched their parents go through a very bitter divorce. They may have experienced some other emotional or mental trauma that is affecting them in class, and it's going to prevent them from accessing the material because that hurt and that pain, that trauma is so present and it's so powerful that you can't expect them to be focused on memorizing math facts, understanding what an array is when there's just too much pain there. You need to learn who they are, how to break through those things, help them cope with them so that they can be successful emotionally, mentally, and academically. So, speaking of those challenges and speaking of trauma, you need to be able to draw on your own strengths to help your students find theirs. Want to talk more about trauma and the trauma you bring with you into your classroom, but acknowledge first, what is it that you are adept at accomplishing? What skills do you bring to the classroom? I love technology. In my 3rd grade classroom, every student is on a Chromebook 100% of the, well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Most of the time. Most of the time my students are on a Chromebook. They are completing all of their work electronically. They're submitting it to me electronically. That is very demanding on the amount of time that I have to teach the actual curriculum and the skill, because I'm spending a lot of time teaching the technology, teaching the software, how to interface with this new layer of complexity. And some teachers will criticize me and say, that really is just another layer of complexity. How is this benefiting the student? Well, from what I see, their future is technology. So I want to provide that to them. That's one of my strengths. I'm sharing that with my kids. I have students who have been in my class who are now in high school, who have now graduated, who've come back to me and said, thank you. I was the kid who was helping the teacher go around the class to help my co-students be able to accomplish these technical skills that they required in order to complete the assignments. What is your strength? Look in yourself and find out what those are, and don't be shy. You have them. It may not be technology. It may not be something that's very flashy, but you have something that's unique that you bring to the classroom. Share it with your kids. On the next slide, the question is, how do we create a safe and supportive learning environment? So, in creating a safe and supportive learning environment, Johnny wanted me to specifically answer a few questions. And one of those is, how do you prepare to be an effective teacher? What is the ideal elementary classroom? And how do you measure success? So let's move on to the next slide to take a look at that first one, preparing to be an effective teacher. In your process of preparing to be an effective teacher, you've completed your basics grades, elementary and middle and high school. Now you find yourself in a college preparing to be a teacher in a classroom. You do have to have the certifications. Those are required. But there are some other important skills that maybe aren't taught that are very important. I just said a moment ago that it's very important for you to identify your strengths, bring those, share them with your students so that you can help them identify their strengths. What's also important in preparing to be an effective teacher is acknowledging your weaknesses. This is very, very difficult because you have to become vulnerable enough to admit to yourself, I'm not so good at this skill. Perhaps it's a subject. Maybe it's history and it's not your strong point. Maybe it's identifying with students. Maybe it's an emotional connection. But identifying what that is really important for you to do. Don't avoid it. You will see your students in your class do this very thing. They will avoid acknowledging or engaging with anything that brings to the surface their weaknesses. You have to model that for them, especially in an elementary classroom. You have to be willing to be vulnerable and show the students this is how you learn to come to terms with the fact that I'm not the best at this skill. And then show them how you massage that and how you become vulnerable, open to suggestion and improvement. This is some of the most important modeling that we will do as educators. You will do a lot of modeling with math, showing them how to complete an algorithm to find the answer to some problem. It's not all that different, but it can be a little messy. Yes, you do have to balance not crossing a line of privacy for yourself and for your students, but you do need to help them learn how to work through that process. Going along with that, you're going to have to embrace uncertainty. You're in an elementary classroom. You are going to have uncertainty. Now, I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, as I mentioned earlier. I saw the classrooms in Taiwan, and honestly, I did not like what I saw. I saw rows of students who were lined up, and they sat incredibly still and incredibly quiet, and they had to absolutely conform to whatever the teacher expected and asked of them. It was uncomfortable. So let me acknowledge, I am an American. American education is very different. So I have to acknowledge that and say, well, culturally, that is expected. It's a much more stringent, structured environment. My classroom isn't. Some people would come into my classroom and look around and think that it's just absolute chaos. Another teacher might come in and say, I can't believe how well behaved your students are. It's all a matter of tolerance and perspective. But by embracing uncertainty, you're going to be able to kind of go with the flow and make adjustments as you need when they come in. This can be a student who comes into you who's experienced some unexpected, unfortunate event, and maybe it's some major thing, a family member has passed away. Maybe they just had a bad morning and it didn't go that well. But that can introduce some uncertainty into your classroom, unexpected behaviors, and things are going to kind of throw you off. If you are so rigid and you're not willing to bend and adapt to those situations, you will break and you will lose your temper, then you'll lose their trust. And that is the most damaging thing that can happen. You need to have the trust of your students. So, you're in your classroom. You've acknowledged your weaknesses. You've embraced your uncertainty. In order to be effective at this, you're going to have to develop some self-compassion. You're going to have to learn to be patient with yourself. If your personality is one of perfectionism, please get some help. And I don't say that lightly. This is not a profession where you can expect yourself or others to be absolutely perfect. Isn't learning all about making mistakes? Isn't learning paving the pathway to success with failure, stepping on those foundational stones and moving forward? Again, modeling that for your students is a critical skill. If you show them the absolute unbending need, unyielding need for perfection, you are setting them up for absolute failure. If you can model for them making a mistake and how you recover and rebound from that mistake, even better, because of what you've learned from it, you are not only going to benefit yourself, but the many children in your classroom. Develop that self-compassion and learn to model failure. Now, on the next slide, Johnny also wanted me to ask to describe to you what I would see when I walk into an ideal elementary classroom setting. Now, on the bottom, you see that there is a picture on the left of a classroom without students, but it's very, very neatly organized, very beautiful colors, it's clean, but it's not just a look. There are no students in that classroom. In the picture on the right, you see a group of young children who are looking up apparently at their teacher. Their smiles, they're engaged, they're excited, they want to learn. An ideal classroom isn't just a look, it's definitely a feeling. Now, remember, it's not just a look. Your classroom hopefully is going to be organized. Hopefully more organized than mine. My desk, I love to connect with some of my students because I have a student who I will approach at various times during the day and I'll say, "Is your desk feeling okay?" And they'll look at me confused and say, "I'm not sure what you mean." Well, your desk looks like it appears to be throwing up. There's papers and pencils and it's everywhere. Do we need to get it some medicine? And they'll kind of chuckle and say, "Well, yeah, maybe it probably needs some help." And then to make sure that the student knows that I have compassion for them, I might actually walk them over to my teacher desk and show them the couple of piles that have accumulated on the left side of my desk that really do need my attention. So I can give them the encouragement to say, if you could have yours cleaned up before I clean mine up, do you think that's possible? How about tomorrow morning? If it's something that's more urgent, then help them with that. Maybe they lack the organizational skills. Give them the pointers and give them the skills so that they can successfully complete those tasks. On the next slide, let me double check and make sure. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say there. On the next slide, the question Johnny poses, what is an adequate measure of student success within the classroom? You are students. What do you want? What do you do? Well, maybe it would be more accurate for me to share with you my experience as a college student in the American university system. The students want to know the game. We would share notes with each other. Have you taken this class? Really? Who did you take it from? That professor? Oh, is that a good No, not that professor. I need to take it from this other professor. Why? What is it that this professor does that's different from that professor? Well, the students want to know the game. They want to know what are the expectations from that particular framework, that classroom, that makes it so much more enjoyable. Now, sometimes that means you're not going to get the best education. You don't want to just be the fun teacher, but you do want to communicate very clearly what your expectations are. If you're looking to lower the anxiety level of students, one of the best ways to do that is to clearly communicate expectations. If there's any ambiguity, if there's any misunderstanding about what exactly does he want on this assignment, there are going to be those introverted, quiet personalities that are going to sit and suffer, not knowing, fearful of raising a hand and asking. Do your best to clarify and make sure that they understand. Tell them what the game is. This is how you win this game. Complete these tasks in this order, in this fashion, and you'll be successful. Does that sound familiar? Unfortunately, life is a game. I don't mean to just make light of it, but make sure your students understand. Clearly define what success looks like. Tell them this is. I like to give my students examples, previous student work examples, to show them this is what I consider an A paper or the best job I've ever seen. Why it's the best job. Go through it with them and give them examples. It's also important, I think, in elementary school. I understand that in the high schools and middle school and high school, well, actually, I know in many Asian countries, even in elementary school, there's a placement test that you take at the end of the year to determine what school you qualify for in the intermediate and middle school and high school. That's frightening, and I can't imagine that ever being adopted in America. But it's important to focus on improvement. Establish the baseline of where the student's performing. Determine, is there anything that is preventing this student from being successful? Is there a learning disability? Are there emotional or mental traumas that have taken place that we need to have taken care of and addressed? If you've eliminated all of those things, then maybe they just need a tier 2 or a smaller group personal intervention to help them. And help them to understand that, again, you're not looking for perfection. You're looking for improvement. You're looking to see what is it that you're capable of so that they can, we call it an intrinsic motivation. They're not waiting for a candy. They're not waiting for someone to say, "Attaboy, good job." They want it themselves. You can help them develop that intrinsic motivation, that internal motivation, by showing them that they are capable, by not giving them challenges that are just well beyond their capacity. Focus on improvement. All right, now we come to student discipline. This is my favorite. I've kind of been addressing this the whole time, I'll admit, but on this slide with student discipline, I love this question. Are you an educator or are you an enforcer? Do you want to be a teacher or do you want to be a police officer? How do you want your classroom to run? How do you want your classroom to feel? How do you create an environment where you are focused on education and you're not focused on enforcement? And I think part of the answer lies on the next slide, and that is right time, right place. If you are the only person in the room who is responsible for making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and how, you are going to be very, very frustrated. If those students are looking to you to know what to think, what to say, what to do, and when to do it, you're going to be very frustrated with a very frustrated group of students. Right time, right place. Whenever a student is doing something, if you think about it, they're not doing anything that is truly evil. Well, gosh, I hope not. I've never experienced, I honestly, in my years in the classroom, I have never experienced any behavior from a student that could not be characterized as fine and acceptable at another time or in another place. When I give that to the student and I approach them and say, what's going on? Most of them will bow their head and become embarrassed and feel like, okay, I'm sorry, I got caught. Like, wait a minute, hang on. No, that's not the reaction I'm looking for. I want you to be thinking about what you did and why you did it. First of all, is there anything wrong with it? So I'll go through a scenario with the kid to help them establish this in their own mind. I'll ask them, is there anything wrong with riding your bicycle? Nice sunny day, you've asked your parents for permission, you're wearing a helmet, your parents know that you're going to stay in this particular area in the neighborhood. Is there anything wrong with that? The student will think for a moment, they're kind of scared that it's a trick question, thinking I'm going to say, gotcha. No, I'm not playing getcha, gotcha. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, now let's take that bicycle and let's put it through a muddy puddle, and then we put it in your living room on the white carpet. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, yes. No, mom's going to kill me. I just got mud all over the carpet. So what's the problem? Is riding a bike the problem? No. What is the problem? It's not the right place. If the student understands and they can learn to self-moderate what behavior is the right time or right place for, then you have given them maturity. You have taken away the enforcer piece, and now you are becoming the enabler in a good way. You are helping them to learn for themselves. I know what to do. I know when to do it, because this is why. So when we talk about right time, right place, on the next slide, you'll see these are pictures I've taken in my classroom. I have this up in my classroom. And you may recognize some of these characters. There's a picture of Joy and Bing Bong from the movie Inside Out. And they're on a radio flyer wagon, and there's a rainbow trail flying out from behind them. There's another one of Bing Bong and balloons and flying up in the air. And then there's also, by right place, there's the fear character, and he's standing very nervously by these little colored circles. In order to truly understand right time, right place, we also need to help these students understand emotion. So let's take a look at the next slide and talk a little bit about Inside Out and the powerful lessons you can share with your students. I had a student in my class. She had never experienced anything close to anxiety before in her life. When I called her mother and I said, these are the behaviors I'm seeing, and they were fairly extreme, her mom was very concerned because she said, I've never seen this before. What was happening was whenever we would begin to discuss something, a new piece of software, the beginning of the year, it comes fast and furious. It's the Chromebook, it's the new software we're using, it's how to log in, it's memorizing your username and password. They're 8 and 9 years old. It's very overwhelming. Well, most of the students handle that well. This girl was just breaking down in tears. She was sobbing. It was just uncontrollable. Just, you could tell she was very disturbed. And she couldn't do anything once she had reached that point. I tell kids I like confusion, not frustration. And that's a whole different discussion. But what I came to understand is that she was just experiencing some very serious anxiety for the first time. So whenever something's happening in my class like that, I will point to the wall that I have, and there's a big picture of Riley, who's the main character from the movie Inside Out. And all around Riley are pictures of these emotions: anger and fear. See, anger, if you're looking at it from my, anger would be here and fear is over here. Joy is on the right side, disgust and sadness and bing bong. And I incorporate right time, right place along with helping them understand the emotions that they're experiencing. So when I sat down with this girl and I said, "What is wrong? You're not in trouble." Just immediately establishing a very clear expectation. You're not in trouble. You've done nothing wrong. Let's talk about what you're feeling. Well, she didn't know how to express it because she'd never felt that intense level of anxiety before. So we talked through it, and finally came to fear. She was afraid. She was afraid she was going to fail. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to do it. And when I had this discussion with her, I know it sounds like I'm asking you to be a counselor, but there's really no other way to say it. You're an elementary school teacher. You're a counselor. You're going to be helping them with these things. I asked her, what is fear saying to you? I asked her to address fear, her fear, to address it verbally. What is the problem? Why are you throwing this at me, this intense emotion? And then she was able to say, well, fear is telling me that I'm not going to succeed, that I'm going to fail, and I'm not good enough, and all this is coming out. Then I was able to help her work through, okay, has fear considered this? And we talked about the math test that she had just taken two or 3 days prior, where she got a perfect score. She did an excellent job on this math test, and said, has fear considered how well you did on the math test? No. Well, tell fear, look, I was really successful in this math test. Really? Yeah. It's okay. Say it. You can say it. You can talk to fear, and you can say, look, fear, I'm really good at math. I did really well at this math test. And yeah, it might be hard, but my teacher's here. And my mom thinks that I should be here. If you can work them through those feelings, then they can understand that, one, feelings are never something to be ashamed of, never something to apologize for. They're there to help you. One misconception that many of my students have, we'll discuss all of the emotions. When we discuss the emotions and I ask them, which one of these are bad? They've seen the movie, but they don't remember. None of the emotions are bad. They'll often point to anger. They'll say anger is a problem. Anger is bad. Fear is bad. Well, no, fear's not bad. Anger's not bad. And if you remember the movie, sorry for those who've not seen it, spoiler alert, sadness is the hero of Inside Out. Helping the students understand the relationship with these emotions that they have is really important to helping them know that they can control those emotions, that they're good, that fear is there to prevent you from being harmed in some way, but it has to be balanced out with all of the information, because if you're just talking to fear, you don't have all of the information. Joy can actually come and talk to fear and say, hey, but let's consider this. And then helping the student understand that, yes, there are going to be times where fear is right, and this is a bad situation, and I need to get out because this isn't safe. When is that appropriate? You see, right time, right place, and understanding your emotions go much farther than just classroom management. It's helping them to know what to do when their parents aren't around, when you're not there, and they're in a situation by themselves with friends, or they find themselves somewhere else in a situation that could be physically dangerous. They need to have that skill and maturity to make that decision for themselves. Be that anger, fear, joy, disgust, doesn't matter what the emotion is. All emotions are good. They just need to know how to converse with them, acknowledge what that emotion is trying to contribute to them, and then ask the emotion to listen to all the information. Bring joy in to talk to anger. Or maybe you just need to have a conversation with anger. And one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in a third grade classroom was this. Actually, any classroom, but it did happen to be in third grade. I had 3 boys who wanted to bring their Game Boys to school. That's how long ago this was. Game Boys were the thing. And my policy is you don't bring toys to school, because tools, not toys. A toy is pretty much a toy. So no, you may not bring it to school. They badgered me, they begged me, they hounded me, and finally I acquiesced. I gave in and said, okay, fine. But you need to understand that if anything happens to these Game Boys, if they get lost, broken, stolen, misplaced, I don't want to hear about it. And I need a note from your parents that you understand that, and they agree to let you bring it to school. They brought them to school. Well, no one lost theirs. There wasn't any broken or stolen. There weren't any of those issues, but they did get into an argument. They got into an argument about what they were playing and who was cheating and who wasn't cheating, and their feelings were hurt. And they were very upset. So I brought him in, and I did what I usually do. And okay, guys, it's his turn to talk. You just listen. Say what you want to say. And then everyone has a chance to respond. We went through everyone. We gained some understanding. We gained some perspective. It was finally time to see if that restorative circle was effective. I turned to the first boy and I said, are you good? Do you feel like we've resolved your concern, that the hurt you felt has been taken care of, that you accept the apology? Are you ready to move on? Yeah, I'm ready to move on. Looked at the 2 other boys and said, yeah, I'm sorry and I accept your apology. I turned to the second boy. He also agreed. Yes, I agree. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I contributed to this and I accept your apology. I turned to the third boy. I said, do you agree? Are you ready to let this go? Do you accept their apology? Do you understand you contributed to this? And I wasn't really quite ready for the level of maturity that I was about to hear from a third grade kid, an 8-year-old at the time. No. What? No. We'd made so much progress. What's the problem? I'm thinking in my mind, what could possibly be the problem? No, Mr. Sahagun, I still need time to be angry. Whoa. How often are we harmed, emotionally or otherwise, in some way? And when it comes time to forgiveness, we are honest enough with ourselves to say, I'm not ready yet. I still need time. How often do we demand and expect from our students that we need to move on? We've got this lesson to teach. I've got to move on. So whether you're ready or not, here we go. That's not how it works. If you can't help them work through these emotions and learn right time and right place, you will never get to the academics. Oh, sure, you'll teach the lesson. You will have taught them, but they will never learn it because they have all of these barriers in front of them, protecting themselves and preventing you from helping them get to the academics. What's most important? The social emotional, the mental health. That is the most important piece in your job as a teacher. So, on the last slide, my closing thoughts. You are part of a whole solution. Please don't take upon yourself every single one of these students and think that you are going to save them. That's not realistic. But you can be an important part in helping to identify what their needs are and developing and building a team around that student to ensure their success, their emotional, their social, their mental, and eventually their academic success. You are part of a solution. You are part of a team, an important part in the lives of these children. Don't do it all yourself because you can't. Your job is to help your students become their whole selves. If you can give that to them, you have given them one of the greatest gifts that any teacher could ever do. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm looking forward to hearing through Johnny some of your success stories and some of the things that you have developed. What are some things that you have found that work for you? Because, like I said, my advice, take it with a grain of salt. What's going to work for you might not work for someone else. What's going to work for me, likewise. But we are educators, and we will always be focused on students. Thank you.